Alrighty. We've been looking at verses in Proverbs and saying how we can apply God's wisdom into our lives. There's a short section in Proverbs that's 5 verses long, and it lists 2 insects, a hyrax, which I'll be honest with you, I thought was an insect until I looked it up. And it's kind of a small rodent. And it also talks about a lizard. And I'd like for us to take a look at this passage over the next couple of weeks and take a look at these creatures and see how God's wisdom can apply to us, how we can take that and apply to us as well. It's spring. Naturally, bugs are coming out. Down at our house, that is the case as well. Since we now have a dog, the light in the backyard, we've got a little area that's fenced off, and we have a light out there so the dog can go out at night and that kind of thing. And you all know how lights love to attract bugs. We have June bugs and moths, all kinds of moths, naturally mosquitoes, but just a lot of bugs. And because of that, Journey, of course, I've told you all before how Journey is with bugs. You know, every bug she sees, she loves. I love that moth. She can hardly wait until the centipedes, the millions of centipedes, hatch out up here, because she loves the other bugs she won't touch, but she loves picking up the centipedes and carrying them around. I love those bugs. Ants. That's what we're going to look at tonight. You have to warn her. There's a fire ant mound. Stay away from it. Oh, I love fire ants. That's because you haven't stepped in a mound yet. Anyway, so these critters, I guess you could say, we're going to take a look at. And that's kind of what has led me in this direction, is with all the bugs that we've been experiencing and Journey's fascination. You know, we've had these caterpillars out on our swing set and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that's a great way to, maybe that's leading us that direction. So it starts in Proverbs 30, verse 24, is where it takes off. It says, 4 things on earth are small, yet they are extremely wise. And then Solomon lists these 4 creatures: the ant, the hyrax, the locust, and the lizard. Now, with the exception of the type of hyrax that we're going to have to look at next week, which is indigenous to the Middle East, these are all creatures that you can find in your typical garden. I mean, they're everywhere. And Solomon tells us that they each have their own unique brand of wisdom, that there's something that we can learn from them. So let's explore this unique brand of wisdom that Solomon provides for us and see how maybe we can take some steps to live our own lives with a little more wisdom. So look at the next verse. Look at verse 25. Proverbs 30, verse 25. It says, the ants are not a strong people, yet they store up their food in the summer. Ants, if you study them, are fascinating creatures. Donna's homeschooling journey, didn't know if you all were aware of that, besides working, doing the preschool on Tuesdays and Thursdays, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, she homeschools Journey as well. And a couple of months ago or so, they were looking at ants and the homeschool curriculum that Dawn has I think it's called My Father's World, I think is what it is. It's a Christian-based homeschool curriculum. But they were studying ants. They were looking at ants. And so we had to buy an ant mountain. Basically, it's a ant farm that's in the shape of a mountain for ants. Had to order this thing, order the sand, and order some ants. Because you had to have a special kind of ant for this thing to work. Anyway, so we had an ant farm sitting on our dining room table for about a month. It was on the table. It's now on a shelf, and I actually looked at it yesterday, and there were a couple of ants left alive in there, which amazed me. Some of them were still hanging in, just waiting for all of them to die so that we can empty it out, because the ants that are in it are not an indigenous species, and we don't want to start something that in Texas that someday somebody might regret. So we're waiting until they all die, and then we'll get rid of them. But it was fascinating to watch them dig the tunnels that they were digging, and you know, all the sand was on one side, and how they would tunnel down, and then they'd bring it up and take sand over to the other side of the mountain and start building stuff over there. And then once a week you had to put a couple of drops of water in there, and you fed them celery, drop pieces of celery in there, and they'd cut it up, and that's what they'd eat. But it was just fascinating to watch them just work, I guess you could say, in this thing. Normally, we tend to see ants as a nuisance. You never hear anyone say, "Oh boy, we've got ants in our house." It's not something that you hear. We usually just kind of snuff them out without a second thought. And I'm not recommending that you give ants free rein in your kitchen. But maybe the next time you see one, I'll encourage you to think about how brilliant this little creature is. They can carry 50 times their body weight in their jaws. It's pretty amazing. They can create colonies that spread for thousands of miles. In fact, there was some researchers, some entomologists, and I want to say this was in South America, and they do DNA studies on ants to find out, because different colonies have different DNA. And they found one colony that literally was spread over 3,000 miles from one colony underground. I mean, it was spread out that far. There's also entomological evidence that ants have been using farming techniques longer than humans have. Certain ants burrow down, and in their burrows, they actually grow mushrooms. They farm these tiny little mushrooms that they eat. And there's evidence that they've been doing that a whole lot longer than humans have been farming. If you were to take the total weight of all the humans on Earth and the total weight of all the ants on Earth, the ants would weigh more. There are 1.5 million ants per human on the Earth. Sometimes I feel like they all live in my yard. Any of you remember the movie, the Disney movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? Y'all remember that? Okay. If you haven't seen it, the plot's kind of in the title. Sorry, I gave it away. Okay. The kids get shrunk by their eccentric father, who's a scientist, and they have this crazy adventure in their backyard as they try to get back to the house. And in the course of their adventure, they make friends with an ant. Now, true. This is just kind of a silly little Disney movie. But the storyline showed that even the life of one seemingly insignificant ant can have meaning. Here in Proverbs, Solomon is saying something very similar to that. Most people see ants as a source of irritation. Solomon sees them as a source of wisdom. So what does he tell us about the ant? Look at that verse again. The ants are not a strong people, yet they store up their food in the summer. This isn't the only time that Solomon actually talks about ants. He gives the ant a similar shout out, if you will, back in Proverbs 6. Proverbs 6 verses 6 through 8 says, "Go to the ant, you slacker, observe his ways and become wise. Without leader, administrator, or ruler, it prepares its provisions in summer. It gathers its food during harvest." Solomon is saying that the ant is the master of preparation. It knows how to get ready. But knowing how to get ready isn't really the wisdom part. Everyone knows how to get ready. What makes ants so wise is that they actually get ready. Ants take the necessary steps to be prepared for whatever might come their way. So, first, let's take a look at some obstacles to preparation. Okay? In my own life, and in the lives of many of the people that I've known throughout my time in ministry, I've observed some very common obstacles and hindrances to developing the discipline of preparation. The first obstacle, man, I can't talk tonight. The first obstacle to preparation is the belief that if you're prepared, it means that you have a lack of faith. There have been a lot of times when I've run across people who had the idea that too much preparation indicates that you have a lack of faith in God. When I was in youth ministry, there were several times when I was planning mission trips, and I wanted to have everything planned out on these mission trips. And I wanted to have contingencies planned out on these mission trips in case there was an issue that arose. And on several occasions, when I'd be talking with the pastor of the church where we were going, their response was, well, let's just trust God that the problem won't come up. I believe God's on this trip, so let's just trust Him to work out the details. That would be like the ant colony collectively saying, we know that winter will be here in a couple of months, so let's just trust God that winter will simply look a whole lot like spring. I saw a meme several weeks ago. You know how I am with my memes, okay? I saw one several weeks ago. I may put it up at some point on a Sunday. And it says, warning, a lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. And I tend to believe that God might say the very same kind of thing to us. His involvement in our lives, His leadership, His guidance, His protection, is not intended to eliminate our need to do our part in taking responsibility for the job that He's given us to do. The second obstacle to preparation is always playing catch-up. It shouldn't be hard to understand that it's difficult to prepare when you're always playing catch-up. If you're always struggling to fill in the gaps left over from yesterday, it's all but impossible to try to prepare for tomorrow. John Maxwell talks about this very thing in a book called Today Matters. And he talks about the difference between repairing and preparing. He said, when you're repairing, you're focused on cleaning up yesterday's mess. When you're preparing, you're focused on getting ready for tomorrow's blessings. When you're repairing, you're always paying yesterday's bills. When you're preparing, you're financing tomorrow's dreams. When you're repairing, you're struggling to stay afloat. When you're preparing, you're getting ready to set sail. And I know that there are people who would say, yeah, okay, I get it. I should be preparing, not repairing. But guess what? I'm in way over my head right now. I'm late on every project. I'm behind on every bill. I see nothing but long-term repairing in my future. How do I make the transition from being fully prepared in everything? I mentioned before about the lobbyist that I used to work for in Topeka. Her office worked pretty much in crisis mode all the time. We went from one crisis and deadline to the next. It was not unusual for me to work 15 to 16-hour days, 6 days a week. It just wasn't. And I was married to Dawn. I would get up early and go into work, and I would work all day, and then I would go home and eat, and then she would go with me back up to the office and would generally help me to try to get done with things that we were doing or that I was doing. And during that time, I learned that when I finished one project, whether it was a newsletter or a convention yearbook, whatever it was, whenever I got done with one, then I'd do a little bit of work on one that was due in 6 months or so, or 3 months down the road, while she looked over the one that I had just gotten done doing. Because I knew that if I didn't want to live in this constant crisis mode, I needed to get some other things to get started, to get a jump on some of the other things that were due in the future. That way, they wouldn't then become a crisis when it got time for them to come up. The only way to get out of a state of always repairing to the state of always preparing is to start preparing now, as much as you can, even during the scramble that you're in. The third obstacle to preparation is the influence of others. It's kind of hard to believe, but there are times that when you're trying to properly prepare, that there are other people who are going to try to talk you out of it. Even well-meaning people will say, you don't need to worry about that now. You got 6 months to worry about it. There are more important things that you can take care of today. Or they'll say, you know, the sun's shining today. Get out and enjoy your life. Sometimes they'll even misapply Scripture and tell you, let tomorrow take care of itself. Live for today. In college, I had friends who would be working on a term paper as soon as the semester began. You'd go to class, one of the first days of class, the professor would give you a syllabus of everything that you were going to be covering in class and every assignment that was going to be due, when tests were, all that kind of stuff. And generally, in many of those classes, there was a big term paper that was due at the end of the semester. And it would have in the syllabus what that term paper was supposed to cover. And I had these friends who would start working on those term papers immediately. They would start compiling notes, making their outlines, all the stuff that was involved. While I would tell them that they had the whole semester to get that thing done. Me? I'd wait until the week before it was due. And then spend days upon days surviving on nothing but coffee and Rolaids while I tried to get the paper together, scraping together and finding all the stuff that I needed for it. All the while swearing that I was never going to make that mistake again, while they simply smiled and shook their heads and went out to eat at Applebee's. Without me. I've learned since then. Now, hopefully from the things that you've heard me say and preach over the past couple of years, you know that I fully well believe that you need to live today. The Bible teaches very plainly that today matters. We need to make the most of every day that we have. But we need to keep in mind that the way that you can make the most of it, the way that you can live each day to its fullest, is to invest at least a part of each day in preparing for tomorrow. Many times, the people around you don't get that. And if you let them, they'll take you off track. They're going to guide you off target. That's why Solomon told us to consider the ant. Without leader, administrator, or ruler, it prepares its provisions in summer. It gathers its food during the harvest. Solomon is saying that the ant is a self-motivated self-starter. And that's what we need to be. So to recap so far, in developing an ant-like preparation-focused lifestyle, you need to keep in mind that preparation doesn't indicate a lack of faith in God. Instead, preparation indicates a willingness to do your part in what God has given you to do. You also need to realize that preparation isn't something that you put off till later. You know, once your life is suddenly organized and all your problems have disappeared, preparation is something that you need to start doing right now, right away, even today. If your life is a little bit of a whirlwind, you can still start getting ready for what lies ahead. If not, you'll always be in crisis mode. If you want to develop an ant-like preparation skills, you also need to realize that you can't listen to others when they tell you that the sun is shining today. Get out and enjoy it. Like the ant, you need to be self-motivated and a self-starter. Now, I've been talking about the importance of preparation. And some of you may be thinking, what are we supposed to prepare for? What are we getting ready for? Well, there are two things that we need to prepare for according to this passage. And these two things apply to every area of our life. First off, we need to prepare for life's challenges. That's preparing for the winter. And we also need to prepare for God's blessings. That's preparing for the harvest. So let's take a look at the winter first. The ant prepares all summer for the winter months. He knows that there are going to be lean times. And when the lean times come, because he's prepared, he's ready for them. That's hard for some Christians to accept, because they think the Christian life is just this perpetual picnic that's always like church camp. And then when winter comes, it knocks them off their feet. It's a fact of life, whether you're a Christian or not, that there are going to be some winters that you're going to have to endure. A family member who may be healthy in every way gets sick. There may be unexpected increases in your expenses or unexpected decreases in your income. There could be conflicts that you didn't create and storms that seemingly showed up out of nowhere. This is true in your family. It's true in your finances. It's true in your friendships, in your business, in your health. And it's true in your spiritual life as well. I'm not trying to be some kind of a gloom and doom prophet here when I say that winter is coming. I'm simply being a meteorologist. It's going to happen. I'm just telling you what every ant on the planet understands. There's a season coming when it's going to get cold and things aren't going to be green for a little while. You need to do what you can to get ready for it. Financially, obviously, you prepare by saving. That's the easiest one to identify, even if it's not the easiest one to implement. What about your health? You prepare for your senior years by taking care of yourself in your junior years. Now, obviously, this subject is probably more for somebody who's listening to this online than it is for you all sitting there, since most of us are in our senior years. Okay? Although I have learned, now that I'm in my 60s, that having donuts and Dr. Pepper for breakfast is not the best way to get to my 70s. It doesn't take a dietitian or a doctor to figure out that health is about more than just calorie intake. Even I know that 300 calories of salad is much better for you than 300 calories of ice cream. Again, let me say, this is what I find. This is not necessarily the way I am. What about in our relationships? Even the best families, even the best marriages go through conflict. One of the ways we prepare for those conflicts is that we make sure we maximize the good times. We create roots in a relationship to prepare us for the difficult times. Every marriage faces a season of winter. But if it's following a healthy spring, summer, and fall, then the winter is easier to endure. What about spiritually? Yeah, we even need to prepare ourselves spiritually. There are going to be times when you don't feel God's presence. There are going to be times when He seems to be silent, when answers don't come easy, when He allows things to happen that you don't understand at all. It's not a question of if winter will be here, it's a question of when. And for this reason, during the days of our spiritual summer, we need to prepare ourselves for the cold winter months. So how do you prepare for spiritual winter? Once again, you drive those spiritual roots deep through the habit of daily Bible study and daily time with God. You make sure that you spend time in His presence every day. And then that brings us to the harvest. Simply preparing for life's problems isn't all there is to prepare for. We also need to prepare for God's blessings. Solomon said that the ant stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. We need to remember that life consists of one harvest after another. And there's always a harvest on the way. Just as we prepare for lean times, we need to prepare for the bounty. Over the years, I've read quite a few books about church growth. Most of them have been written by pastors or staff members of churches that are experiencing consistent patterns of growth. And every one of them, though they're experiencing growth, they're always looking ahead and preparing for the next level of increase that is going to come. They're always preparing for the next harvest. When they had 75 people, they said, let's make sure that we've got things in place so that we can accommodate 125. Now, I'm not just talking about parking and seating. I'm talking about the programming and the classes and the events. They're always looking ahead. When they reach 125, they start looking at what they can do when 200 starts showing up. You remember the phrase from Deep Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come. There are a lot of churches and individuals that are prone to say, when they come, then we'll build it. In other words, I'll start getting ready for the harvest when the harvest gets here. It's a little late by then. The fact is that many churches aren't prepared for an increase in attendance. They're not training leaders. They aren't planning new ministries. They have no idea what to do with new people if new people suddenly showed up. Just about every church that I have been associated with faces this issue in one form or another. But the same could be said about a lot of businesses. The same could be said about people's lives. They think the harvest of abundance is just something that you receive, something that you respond to when it happens. But the fact is that you have to prepare for the harvest just like you have to prepare for the winter season. How many times have you heard someone say, if I suddenly won $1 million, I'd start supporting this charity and that charity. I'd just support all kinds of things. I know their intentions are good, but I'd be inclined to say that if you're not generous with your money today, you probably won't be all that generous if you won the lottery. Statistically, 10% of lottery winners give a substantial amount to charities or churches. Only 10%. Speaking of winning the lottery, were you aware that nearly 1/3 of all major lottery winners end up bankrupt within 5 years? Why? It's because they weren't ready for this sudden influx of money. It came in, they had no plan, no priorities, no idea what to do. So what I'm saying is that God wants to bless you, and He will bless you. There's no doubt about that. So you need to prepare yourself and position yourself for the outpouring of God's blessings now. Think about it. If God suddenly doubled your income, could you handle, are you ready to handle that kind of an increase? Would you already know how much you need to invest? How much you need to save? How much you need to give? Or would you say, look at all this money. Where can I spend it? Along the same lines, if God sent the ideal mate into your life, now, don't immediately start thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me. Because I say mate. If you're married right now, yeah, hopefully God's not going to send another mate because you got one. But we have many folks who are widowed or widowers. And God can still send a mate along. This past Saturday, I went to a reception of a couple of 70-year-olds who just got married. It can happen even in older life. And many of you are aware of that. But if God sent the ideal mate into your life, would you be ready? Have you prepared yourself by becoming the person that the person of your dreams would find attractive? It's an interesting way of looking at that, isn't it? Before we can reap the harvest, we need to prepare for the harvest. God wants to bless you, and He will bless you as soon as He can. And by that I mean He will bless you as soon as you're ready to be blessed. Jesus told a story about the master in Matthew 25:23. He said, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." You can build your life on this spiritual principle. In order to get in on big things, you must first learn to be faithful in little things. Jesus also said in Luke 16, verses 10 and 11, Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And whoever is unrighteous in very little is also unrighteous in much. So if you have not been faithful with the unrighteous money, who will trust you with what is genuine? What's he talking about? I think a part of what he's talking about is preparing our heart, and our soul, and our life for the blessings that He has and wants to send our way. Mountain bike racers. So I know a sport that many of you participated in when you were younger. Okay, that joke fell flat. But mountain bike racers are taught a very unique strategy. They're taught to look through the corners. In other words, when you're navigating a bike down this mountain path, down this rugged terrain, you can't afford to keep your eyes constantly focused right in front of you. If you do, you're going to be constantly reacting to everything at the last minute. Instead, coaches teach racers to extend their vision and look as far down the trail as they can. That way they can react to what's coming in a timely basis so that they don't end up wrecking. We need to do the same kind of thing in our lives. You can't get ready for winter in January. Neither can you prepare yourself for the abundance of the harvest when the harvest has already arrived, when the fruit's already falling off the tree. You need to look through the corners of each day of your life as it comes along. You need to consider what you need to prepare yourself for, both for the winter and for the harvest. So here's what I'm encouraging you to do. Think winter all summer. In every area of your life, think about how you can prepare today for the days ahead. that may be less abundant. Think about how that applies to your finances, your health, your relationships, and your spiritual life. And in addition to thinking winter all summer, think harvest all year long. Every day, prepare yourself in every way so that you'll always be in a position for God's blessings when He throws them at you. It comes down to a very simple question that you can ask yourself every morning when you get up. Is what I'm going to do today going to make a difference? Is it going to make me better prepared for what lies ahead, both winter and harvest? And let's face it, if an ant can do it, we probably can too. Okay, next week, we're going to look at the hyrax. A hyrax is, from what I've looked at so far, it's kind of like a prairie dog. It's a little bitty mammal. But there are some things. There are some things that a hyrax does in living strategically. And so that's what I want to look at next week for us. All right? Take out your prayer sheet.